there's statistics that say about almost half of the people in the world are touched in some way by suicide, either a family member, themselves. And so, it's an epidemic that we're facing, and it's because of so much unresolved trauma, and that we all have this unprocessed response to trauma deep inside us, some worse than others, whether it's horrible trauma like war, or whether it's just smaller traumas that are what I call like a million little paper cuts that build up to when all of a sudden someone says something to you and you have this crazy over-the-top reaction. That's what we call a trigger. So that's should be something that you say to yourself, oh, that's something I need to investigate. And that's what we're talking about with trauma and this healing. And the cool thing about psychedelics is, in therapy, you manipulate or you control the conversation. So you can talk about whatever you want to talk about. And if you don't know that trauma, or you're just afraid of talking about it, then you're not going to talk about it. But the psychedelics, they're going to show you, they're going to force you. There's no, oh, I don't want to see that trauma today. No, it's going to be, you need to see it. You need to figure out how to heal from it, and then live your authentic life. And that's the beauty of it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Psychedelic Conversations. Today, we have Dr. Randall Hansen. Welcome. Pleasure to have you.
Wonderful to be here, Susan. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Likewise, it's a pleasure to have you, and thank you for creating this time to be with us. And for a little bit of your context, background, and to our audience to get to know you, I will say a few sentences of your bio, and then we'll take it from there.
Perfect.
Dr. Rand Hansen is an educator, author, and advocate. So he is an advocate for all things healing and author of The Triumph Over Trauma, which we'll get into it in a moment. You've been focused on transforming lives for people for the past 20 years, with special focus on life balance, health, foods, and wellness. And then you discovered healing power of psychedelic medicine 3 years ago and made it your mission since then to be a strong advocate for the intentional use. And that's remarkable. Thank you so much for doing this work.
Thank you.
And just for our audience to get to know you a bit more, what brings you to this space? If you could tell us a bit about your background and your story.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned in your introduction, I've been in the wellness field for about 2 decades, and wasn't as aware of the healing problem or the trauma problem as I noticed that people just weren't happy. And so things like better nutrition, better exercise. So that's what was sort of more of my focus. And then I've always been an advocate for veterans and helping them more, again, in that wellness space than in the trauma space. But about 3.5 years ago or so, my partner listened to a podcast, and then she had me listen to it, that featured Jesse Gould, who is the founder of Heroic Hearts Project. And he talked about his own struggle with coming back. He was an elite soldier, came back to the US. He had a finance degree. He's an intelligent guy. He's like, I'm just going to go back to my finance career and everything's going to be great. And then he realized things aren't great, and he started self-medicating, and he went to the VA, and the VA, which is, we know the story, most people know the story, which is the VA says, here's a bunch of pills, come back in a month, tell us how you're feeling. And he's like, I don't want to go on these antidepressants. He'd done his research, seen that they really didn't do much for the people that he talked with. So he struggled and struggled, and finally someone, typical how it happens in psychedelics, someone just sort of mentions to you, hey, have you thought about psychedelics? And he said, he was very anti-drug. He grew up in the DARE movement in the States, which is, just say no and all these things. But he was convinced that he had to do something. And so he went down to the jungle, down to Peru, and had ayahuasca, which I had never heard of at that point, and had this psychedelic brew that completely transformed his life. These psychedelics have a way of showing you what needs to be healed, and then convincing you that you have the tools within you to do that. And so that began this journey of, first of all, what the heck is ayahuasca, and spending a lot of time researching that, but then also looking at the psychedelic movement and looking at, what happened to it, why are these substances illegal, and so that's then the last 3 years has just been my deep dive into this, talking with experts and following the research. And as you said, my hat that I wear is an educator, and anytime I see things that have not been delivered correctly, information that's not correct, I need to go out there and fix it. So this book and my personal mission is all about, hey, we've been lied to for the past 50 plus years, and we need to correct our thinking and see that these medicines, as most of us call them, are truly something that should be legal in the States, and legal around the world for that matter.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, that's wonderful. We need to have Jesse on the conversation as well. I think he has a very powerful story. And I think the veterans and what's been happening in the US, I mean, globally, but mostly, I think there is a lot of people now coming together, and there's a lot is happening to support. And of course, what he's done single-handedly as well, it's a great mission to help the veterans, I think.
Yes, it's wonderful to see. We now have multiple nonprofits in that space. Of course, at the same time, we've realized we were talking 22 veteran suicides a day, and now they're looking at new research that says it's probably closer to 40 plus veteran suicides a day. And if we pull away that curtain, it's not just veterans. We have first responders that are facing trauma and suicide. There's statistics that say about almost half of the people in the world are touched in some way by suicide, either a family member, themselves. And so, it's an epidemic that we're facing, and it's because of so much unresolved trauma. The work of Dr. Peter Levine and Dr. Gabor Mate, which is mind-changing in terms of how we look at trauma, and that we all have this unprocessed response to trauma deep inside us, some worse than others. I came from a Scandinavian family, and our mantra was sweep everything under the rug, push it down. We're the perfect family. And so you have, whether it's horrible trauma like war, or we just saw this horrible report from Baltimore today that the Catholic Archdiocese the priest there did horrible abuse to children for all these decades. Or whether it's just smaller traumas that are what I call like a million little paper cuts that build up to when all of a sudden someone says something to you and you have this crazy over-the-top reaction. That's what we call a trigger. So that's should be something that you say to yourself, oh, that's something I need to investigate. And that's what we're talking about with trauma and this healing. And the cool thing about psychedelics is, a lot of people who've taken psychedelics say, psychedelics cut out 10 years of therapy or 7 years of therapy or whatever it is. And at first I didn't believe that, because it's like, come on, that therapy is a positive thing. But then I started listening to some of these people and talking to them. And in therapy, you manipulate or you control the conversation. So you can talk about whatever you want to talk about. And if you don't know that trauma, or you're just afraid of talking about it, then you're not going to talk about it. But the psychedelics, the thing I love about the psychedelics is they're going to show you, they're going to force you. There's no, oh, I don't want to see that trauma today. No, it's going to be, you need to see it. You need to figure out how to heal from it and then live your authentic life. And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, that's just so great. Well, I'm glad you're speaking to this, because a lot of people are confused around how do they help heal trauma.
Yeah.
And this is what you're speaking to. If it was a traditional psychotherapy or one-on-one therapy in a therapeutic sessions, it's just another human trying to excavate or pull out or dig out these things that are unknown to our psyche, and we're never meant to go there anyway in the first place. That's why they were kind of pushed under the rug and suppressed. So we weren't meant to have any of awareness of this, and it's just another human being trying to help you talk through and this just kind of figure out what is the root cause of everything, or the triggers, or the suffering, or the chronic whatever they are experiencing. And as you said, but somehow psychedelics can magnify and cut all of this and go straight to the core of what is being carried or suppressed. This is what you're speaking to, right? Just to make it clear to our listeners.
Yes, in fact, here's a great example. This military veteran went down to, again, they go down to Peru or South America and Mexico, because that's where it's legal to do some of these medications. And so he went down to, had an ayahuasca journey, and the first night, he was like, bring it on. I want to heal from this war trauma. And the first night, and I will still get emotional about these things, but so the first night, it was about this little boy, and he's like, whoa, where's the war stuff? And he found in this first night of healing that he had been sexually abused as a child, and he had so blocked it out. That trauma was so horrific. He had no memory of it. And so the first night, he had to clear that trauma, because that was the foundational trauma. And then the second night, he did then face the war trauma. And I was talking to him about that, and he was like, okay, that was good. Now I've had 2 nights of healing, but I hear all these stories about bliss and love, and where was that? And then the third ceremony, that's when he had it, because at that point they had cleared the trauma. And so the third part was, now here I'm going to uplift you with love and show you that the world is one big connection. We're all one people. And that's that's the other part about psychedelics. It's not the big part for me is the healing trauma that we're either aware of or we're not aware of. But the other interesting part about psychedelics is that there's a spiritual component, and which is a beautiful thing. So yes, on one hand, you can find healing through other modalities, and I encourage healing in any way possible. But I love the spiritual component, because there are people that said, I was a diehard atheist before psychedelics, and then after psychedelics, I saw the divine. I can't explain it. I can't tell you what it looked like or what it sounded like or anything, but I met the divine. I know there is life beyond this body. And so it's just beautiful, beyond the healing parts of it, that people are transformed through these medicines.
Yeah, such powerful stories. And I have a feeling I'm yet to start your book. I'm actually excited to read. And I know that is compilation of stories, right? Stories of people healing. What inspired you to write this book?
Okay, well, that's a funny story too. So I, in my own psychedelic journey, I did psilocybin mainly as my healing medicine and had some profound journeys. I was called to ayahuasca and had a very interesting experience with that medicine, mostly because it was kind of a bad healer, and we can talk about that if you're interested at some point, just as a warning to people. But it was I was someone recommended trying LSD, and I was curious about that because it's sort of one of the psychedelics with the most negative aspects about it from the counterculture days of the 60s and 70s. And I found that for LSD, it wasn't so much healing for me as it was transformative. And so it was on this toward the very end of this LSD journey, I was sitting outside my deck, beautiful late summer day. And I had heard other people describe this, and it never had happened to me, but people talk about how they get digital downloads sometimes from the medicine. And I thought, I watched this one documentary where the guy was like, I got my app, my website, my business model from the medicine. And I was like, come on. But literally on my deck that afternoon, I can't tell you how it was. To me, it was like a force. It wasn't a voice like saying, Rand, you need to write this book. But it was, you need to write this book. And so I ran inside, grabbed a pad of paper, I went back outside because I felt like that's where I had to be, and literally wrote down this outline that turned out to be 90% of the book's final outline is that original outline from that LSD journey. And I had no intention before that of writing a book. There are, several quality books on psychedelics, both from the scientific standpoint, if you want that, to the Michael Pollan, How to Change Your Mind, which is, sort of so detailed and brilliant. And then there are other ones, but there aren't that many with stories in them. And so that's what the medicine was like. That's what's the focus of medicine. It wasn't like you're going to write this great book because it's not about me. It was you're going to gather these stories to spread the message, to share, because storytelling is probably the classic way of how humanity shared culture, family values, all these things passing down from one generation to another. Was, here's the story of grandpa and how, he homesteaded our land and blah, 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 or how our great grandmother came over from wherever. And so, we have these stories. And so that's what the medicine said, gather these stories and let those be the ones that convince people that this might be something for them to help them heal.
This is wonderful. So the core of the book is consisting of a lot of the stories.
Yeah.
Not long ago, I think I read in an email content somewhere, there was someone actually, there was I think online sort of webinar to teach people how to tell their psychedelic experiences in a powerful way, because the storytelling part is the one that really impacts and moves people. And you are right, the stories, and this is great. So people telling naturally, their own experiences with the medicine, each of them, and mostly healing their trauma, I believe, mostly healing and transforming their trauma. Earlier, when we started speaking, you said something very interesting, and I'd like to go there if you don't mind. You said, because you've been in the healing arts for so many years, and in your early times, you said that the trauma in itself, the way we know it now, it's so mainstreamed right now that even, everyone talks about trauma now. Trauma is just kind of thrown around, right? Everyone's seemed to have their own version, but at least there is some level of understanding. But I can just imagine how it was for you in the beginning, just kind of, yes, there is something. People are not happy. People are in pain, suffering, maybe symptomatically, pathology. There's lots of depression, mental health. And how was it for you, seeing that, and then now coming, right now in our current realm, it feels like we have a language now. We have something that we could all communicate and talk and connect over this trauma. So if you could maybe speak to us, was it more challenging before? Now is it more easy, or is it just the same?
Well, that's a fantastic question and brilliant insight. I think, yeah, I think at least in terms of psychedelics, we are, cresting this wave of having our language and having people understand that. So getting away from, again, not even all plant medicine. So I'll use cannabis as an example, just even though it's not a psychedelic, but we have this term marijuana that's totally made up name by the drug war. And so it's really cannabis. So now we're starting to see this change of language from not marijuana, which is the negative term, but cannabis, which is the positive term. We're seeing psychedelic medicines talking about it as medicines rather than drugs or things of that nature. But if you look at how these medicines have been classified, we see they have been lumped in with heroin and cocaine and other weird things like bath salts and this crazy stuff. And it doesn't make any sense because there's a little worry for me that I agree that I think we've maybe crested that wave. So we're not going to have a repeat of the early 70s where we had all these psychedelics get banned. But I do worry a little bit. I mean, I love on one hand, we see Time Magazine, Sports Illustrated, Rolling Stone, Nova, all these mainstreams starting to put out, hey, is psychedelics a thing? So that I love that part of it because I think we are building this new language as you're talking about. But on the other hand, we still have so much just crazy disinformation. I was just watching a little video on a study that was done on vitamin D and how vitamin D in this one study reduced cutting and suicidal ideation. And so, there are these simple things we can do to help our healing process. And it's now a question of how do we communicate that? That psychedelics falls in the holistic realm of medicine, and holistically, at least in Western cultures, has been, kind of put down for many decades. And I'm hoping this is part of this resurgence. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with Western medicine, especially in cases of emergency. But so oftentimes what they do is cover up the symptoms rather than heal. And again, that's what the difference between a psychedelic medicine and your antidepressant. The antidepressant is simply covering up masking these depressive feelings, whereas the psychedelic says, no, we're going to get to that trauma. And once you heal that trauma, that depression will be greatly diminished, if not gone, depending on how bad the depression is. And we're still trying to figure out the dosage and things like that. That's what all these research studies are doing now. But it's the results from these preliminary studies that we're seeing over the last 5 years has just been phenomenal. So keep our fingers crossed that it continues.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing. And from a preliminary standpoint, you say that you're an advocate for everything, all things healing. So just like you said, using vitamin D can also alleviate certain, mood and all that. And I'm also aware that used to be niacin. I think niacin was used for depression in the past. So therefore, I guess having, hopefully in the future, of course, in a controlled way, but having the psychedelic medicines in the holistic category would be a dream, really.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll have the education and the preparation and a more mature approach, because that's what's happening right now. I'm sure you're aware of the tons of misleading stuff that are happening around psychedelic medicines. And also just quickly coming back to our, inquiry about trauma now being the prominent and it's so out there and everybody knows. I have a feeling it's kind of like emerged through these psychedelic experiences. One of my favorite sentences that I heard, I don't know, I can't remember where I heard it, but there is this sentence or a quote I heard that psychedelics are cultivating us. So
Yes.
that was really fun way to think. And I'm just thinking maybe we're all becoming so much more educated and aware of the concept of trauma through they are coming. Lots of people are now. I think there was a study or some. I can't remember the exact facts, but I think in the last sort of decade, psychedelic use actually surpassed the 50s, when it was the revolution, counterculture.
Yeah.
That's insane if you think about it. That's insane because in the last 10 years, a decade or a little bit over, it is now known that people are using or taking psychedelics or in all different kind of modalities. It's kind of surpassed the historical use, which gives us a really good clue where we're headed, I think, with these medicines.
I think, again, so much of it is word of mouth or through stories. Someone says to someone else, wow, what's different about you? Why are you, why are you smiling? Or, you're glowing, what's going on? And they say, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't tell you, but I had a psychedelic journey and it changed me. And then that person says, oh, well, maybe I need to research that. Yeah. So it's a kind of a neat way that it just sort of spreads organically through the population.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I think with the post-pandemic era, I think there is a more need, or at least there is a even, dare I say, desperate, seeking for, healing in terms of mental health disorders. Since, for someone in the healing arts, what are your observations, like where we headed with increase? You already told us about the increase in suicidal suicide attempts in veterans, and I'm sure it's not just the veterans, right? It's just sort of globally a lot of people are in that dark place right now, maybe.
You look at this whole picture, Susan, and it's a little scary in a sense. Again, if I look at it from the whole thing. So if we look at food, we have pretty much killed our soil, so we don't have as even the organic stuff that we grow isn't as nutritious because we've depleted our soil. So that's one reason why things like vitamin D we're not getting, and because we're not getting as many nutrients. And that's why our horrible cereals that we see in the store are fortified with 22 minerals and vitamins, because it's not in the soil anymore. We've depleted so badly. So we have. And that's separate from the horrible processed food. But so the food we eat is hurting us in many ways. And we're at a spiritual crisis, more so religious, organized religion, but we're still at this crisis of that, whether it's abuses like I talked about earlier or other things that are driving that. We are taking more prescription pills than we ever had before. I think the average number in the US is 13 prescriptions for every person. Now, some of those are antibiotics or things like that, but still, it's crazy to think we're taking that many medications. And then even with the antidepressants, they were meant to be short-term rather than long-term. And now people are taking them every day, and they're often taking more than one, either one to offset some side effects, or they're taking an antidepressant and an anti-anxiety medication. And then I think, as you mentioned, the other part is mental health. We are, every indicator that we've seen, both adults, but especially in our kids and our school children, those are the lowest levels we have ever seen. And so and as someone said to me a month ago or so, he's like, I think the whole world is depressed. The earth is depressed. And I was like, well, yeah, if you add climate change and some other things going on, then we're in this kind of crisis. And so I'm glad healing has become more of or trauma has become more of a buzzword in a sense, as long as we don't overuse it, because, we are kind of at a precipice in terms of our health, our future, our children's future, especially. And so I'm trying not to be over dramatic, but that's how I feel. I mean, I really feel like we need to heal as a world, as a people.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think we need to speak more to that as time goes. And just a quick question, but you don't have to answer this. What are your thoughts on psychedelic medicines, specifically like mushrooms, for example, with children for ADHD, anxiety in kids, in maybe tiny microdose, or small, tiny subperceptual doses? Do you think that would be a no? Because the reason I'm asking your opinion is because I followed and I read a very powerful article some time ago about certain Mazatec tribes are still initiating their kids from the age of 5 in sort of family setting with high doses. And then they did a little study where they followed a bunch of them to see what happens to them after, because they've been initiated. And no surprise there, all of them sort of found their way into more philanthropy or in service or something that involved helping others, a career path, or just as a person. So what are your thoughts on kids and psychedelics?
Ooh, it's definitely a good question. I will say, if we look at the indigenous populations across the world, there's evidence from archaeological digs and stories and pictographs of cave paintings that psychedelics have been used, probably mostly mushrooms because they're so prevalent around the world, but others too, ayahuasca, ibogaine, for centuries and centuries. And so they are the classic case study because they have had no harm from taking these medicines. And as you've stated, they typically tend to have a much more beautiful worldview and a view of community and wanting to give back rather than that ego of mine, that Western commercialism. And I do know, at least in some of those cultures, there was a rite of passage that sort of teenage to adulthood where they definitely did psychedelics. I haven't seen the study you talked about with the younger children, but I'm fascinated by it, and I'd like to see that more research there. I do know there was a great documentary about parents giving their children medical cannabis for similar things, and how they were shunned and they were afraid of being, their children being taken away from them because of quote unquote neglect. And so to me, it's like, it's a delicate subject. We know the brain is really developing during those years. And so my sort of cop-out answer, I guess, would be I'd like to see a lot more research there. I do know with adults, what we're seeing, which is in my mind, just absolutely phenomenal, is, we thought the adult brain, kind of stopped growing in your 20s. And we're seeing with psychedelics, it's increasing these connections, this neuroplasticity that we talk about. So all of a sudden, we're talking to different parts of our brain that we have never talked to before. And so that's increasing our self-awareness, our knowledge, and it's growing our brain. And so it's like, wow, yeah. So if nothing else, I mean, that in itself is just a beautiful side benefit of psychedelics, that we can make these new connections. And we're also finding, as you mentioned, talking about psilocybin for things like OCD, which one person described to me so beautifully as being on the hamster wheel. and she can't get off it. She's going around it and around it and around it. And what psychedelics do, and again, science, I still want to, it's crazy to me to think about this, but psychedelics find that faulty connection and dismantle it. And so it breaks that, and all of a sudden they're off the wheel. And their feelings of finally being healed from that are just, euphoria. And so, yeah, so these psychedelics have wonderful things with the brain. The question comes back to, is it what age is appropriate for that? And I think I'll cop out and just say I want to see more research on that before I say yay or nay.
Absolutely. I think our audience will be interested in this topic too, because I speak to so many parents, teenagers, even younger than teenage age. They're having so many different disorders already. ADHD is like the biggest one, and then self-harm is now also becoming really widely it's happening, and everybody start to sort of talk about it. And of course, just for harm reduction and for transparency, we just want to tell our listeners that the Mazatec tribes who did initiate their children from age of 5, it was a very different setting. So it wouldn't work in the Western model, because the Western model, the families are broken. There are a lot of single parents. Children are very in different spaces. But in the community, let's go back to Mazatec tribes again, those that are still, kind of carrying on with this tradition, the child is held, and the child is not taking the medicine on their own. They are taking with uncle, the mom, the dad, the granddad. So there is this holding, and the child feels extremely safe. So that's kind of the critical part, isn't it? To just make it clear to our audiences.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, because the other thing that's broken in the West is community. You nailed it so perfectly. If we look at these indigenous cultures, they lived and breathed almost as one. So you lived with your auntie, your uncle, your grandma, your great-grandfather, whatever, and they were all one, and they were all supportive in that group. And that's where healing took place as a community. And here we're fragmented. Even if we're in a still a nuclear family of a mom and a dad and kids, or 2 dads and 2 moms, whatever, but more so we're broken families, and we're not connected to our grandparents or our uncles and aunts. And so we do live a lot different lives. And so that is a very important thing. And one of the things that I stress, and I sort of discovered in this process, is a lot of times with psychedelics, we talk about in the final phase, in what we call integration, is where you start building community. And what I've kind of hit upon is you need to start building community now. You need to start building these supportive people, so that when because that's going to help your healing no matter what, even they're just there loving on you. But then you add the psychedelics, or you add meditation, or you add mindfulness, and you get this group healing, which is just absolutely wonderful. So my biggest advice for anyone thinking about psychedelics is to start looking at building community, because there will be a dichotomy of the traumatized person before and the emerging true self coming out. And sometimes those old friends and community don't mix with the new self. And so it's very important to have that community.
Yeah, absolutely. I need to share something with you. I think you'll like this.
Okay.
We already kind of creating a community over here in the UK with what we're doing here. I have this wonderful lady, and for our audiences, by the way, we have started doing bi-weekly Clubhouse conversations with her.
Good.
And she's been advocating a lot of the recovery and healing from addiction. And she's been part of these fellowships and communities. And one day she shared something that was so powerful and moving for me that I thought, this is what we need to bring to our community. And she said, she was part of a fellowship, which is a community that specifically work with the addiction recovery. And she said, the whole idea was to create a lineage of wisdom, meaning someone who's a few steps ahead of their in recovery would then take on a little sponsee, and then there'll be a sponsor. And then this model, if we can bring it to our communities who are interested in psychedelic medicine work and create, not hierarchical, not like someone's better or they know more or less. It's just about someone who's gone much deeper into the psychedelic experience or the healing journey, who knows a little bit more, then who can then lead the way for others and share. It's a bit like the olden times, where there'll be elders guiding and sharing wisdom. It's a bit like that. And I thought, this is amazing. This is what the West is missing. We need to create wisdom lineage. I thought that was so powerful.
It's beautiful. I love that. I as you were saying that, I was thinking, ooh, healing mentor is beautiful too. But my motto is, it fits with that perfectly, which is heal yourself and then help others heal. So that is that lineage too, because once I've healed myself, or I'm further along that journey, I can turn to the person behind me and say, let me give you a hand. Here's some shortcuts that I learned, maybe that'll help you in your healing journey. So I love that idea, because again, we are all in this together. I love, someone told me a year or two ago, a veteran, of course, said, I think if everyone took psychedelics, there wouldn't be any more wars, because we understand that we are all brothers and sisters. And I know that sounds a little woo-woo to people, like, oh yeah, my brothers and sisters, but it is true. When you have this sort of grander worldview, and you don't have that trauma pulling you down so you can actually see that worldview, it changes you. And you do say, yeah, why am I hating on this group of people? Or, why is there this crazy war going on in the Ukraine? What again, to me, that's a sign of the brokenness of our world also, that we have these wars going on like that. But anyway, back to your point. Yes, I love heal, have this lineage, have this community where people are helping each other heal.
Yeah, absolutely. And accountability always, the accountability. I think this is maybe, for those more challenging trauma responses, like you said, who externalize it to cause more distraction, more harm, more pain externally. I think they definitely need to be surrounded by, if we could, but it's a dream further away, but it's just something to talk about. I think there's no harm in talking about that. I think creating lineage of these and accountability to keep each other in check, because that's also another layer of the whole living in harmony, I guess, among each other, so together. Coming back to your book, what was is there any story that really moved you, that really touches you? And how was it? Was it really difficult to get these, all these stories together, or find the people? What was the process like?
Well, it's fascinating, because I think on one hand, when you have a healing experience, or in this case, specifically a psychedelic healing experience, you kind of want to shout it to the world, but everyone tells you, don't do it, keep quiet, because you're still healing, for one thing, and you're still learning the process. But so on one hand, there were many people that actually, once they found out I was doing it, approached me, which made my life a lot easier. There were some people that just weren't ready to share the story, and I totally accepted that. But I probably asked about, or talked with, maybe about 85 people to get the 23 stories in the book. And my goal, I was also a little bit picky, because my goal was, I wanted as much diversity in the storytellers as possible, because psychedelics has been kind of traditionally white male oriented, and so am I. So I wanted to have that diverse voice out there, and so I'm really happy that we have a good, healthy percentage of BIPOC stories, and we have more than half the stories are from women, which is wonderful, I think. And so it was just a matter of sometimes someone actually. Oh, here's the other cool thing too. I'm a big user of LinkedIn, and I've probably been on LinkedIn since maybe near the beginning. And it's so funny to see the transition in this platform from, and there's still people doing this, but from back in the beginning where it was like, I'm $1 million salesperson, or, I'll cut revenue or I'll cut expenses by blah, 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 to now people saying, I want to share my psilocybin story. And it's like, what? Anyway, so some of those I found just through people sharing the stories on LinkedIn, and all are powerful. One of the neatest things someone told me, as I was thanking them for sharing their story for the book, they said, "No, thank you." And what do you mean, thank me? And she said, as I'm telling you the story, I'm further integrating my healing. And so it's been a benefit to me. And I thought, wow, that was totally unplanned on my part, which again is why I think, I kind of give credit to both the medicine and to the storytellers, not to me. And there are 20 what I call macrodosing or full journey stories. But one of the trendy things in psychedelics is microdosing, as you kind of briefly mentioned, taking a very, very small dose, imperceptible dose, about 1/10 or even smaller of a full-on dose that you do for a journey. And so there are 3 stories of microdosing as well. And I guess the like I said, I think most stories grab me. I still, as you saw earlier, I still tear up at some of these, even though I've now read these stories or edited them, 30 times. But there's the story of Allison, who was married to a Navy SEAL, and lived this life where all her family and her friends were saying, "Oh my God, how amazing! You are married to a hero. You have the perfect life." And meanwhile, her perfect life was they moved like every year, and he was not home for 300 or more days of the year. And most of the time, she never knew where he was in the world, and he didn't know whether he was alive or dead. And she got to the point where she couldn't take the pressure of waiting for that knock on the door where the military were going to come and say, "Sorry about your husband." And then it's flipped over to, I want that knock on the door. I want this to end. And then that drove her into deeper guilt because, oh my God, I don't want my husband dead. And so she just was in this crazy downward spiral, was in therapy, was given antidepressant, anti-anxiety medication. She was also adding, as typically most people do, adding alcohol to self-medicating. As it got worse, all her doctor did was up the dosage of these meds. Her husband retired from the SEALs and actually went and got healing himself through one of these nonprofits we talked about earlier. And rather than being happy for his healing, she was infuriated because where is my healing? And she was very anti-psychedelic. She's like, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And so self-medicating. And finally, they were doing a move to Colorado, and she was still on the East Coast, closing up their last home. And she just lost it. And she called her husband. And she said, if you don't get me help, I might not be here tomorrow. And she went down to Jamaica, I can't remember exactly, where it was legal, and did an MDMA and 5-MeO DMT combined journey. And the experience was so profound. She saw this little girl her first night, and she thought she has I think she has 5 daughters. So she's like, is this one of my daughters? She looked closely. No, it wasn't one of her daughters. And she said, oh, it must be me as a little girl, because that's typically what you see. You see yourself as a child, that inner child work you talked about. But no, it wasn't her. It wasn't her. And the little girl kept saying, wow, Mommy, I'm safe. I'm safe. I'm okay. And she's like, yeah, but who are you? And it turned out it was, and she had totally, again, kind of blocked it out of her mind, hadn't thought about it in like 2 decades. It was an abortion she had had as a late teenager when she wasn't ready to have a child. And it was this trauma that she hadn't, again, this unprocessed trauma that she hadn't realized. She had just sort of pushed it down there. I need to do this. I'm not prepared, and get on with my life. And then she got married and had all these children and got preoccupied. And the child's name was Hope, and she actually wrote Hope on her wrist during the ceremony. And she finally found this love and this self-love, and she realized that she hadn't allowed herself, even though she'd been married and had these children, she hadn't allowed her husband to love her, she hadn't allowed her children to love her. And she had this, just again, brilliant transformation where she is now this loving, beautiful person. Started a nonprofit to help other military spouses who don't typically get the treatment. The military person, the veteran, gets the treatment, but the spouse doesn't, and they often need it just as much as the veteran. So that one, as you can tell, it still gets to me, just because, and all these stories do, of, not everybody sees themselves, or not everyone even has visions. But they all come off. Ryan, who was this Marine veteran who talked about having moral injury, as well as PTS, as well as all this trauma from seeing his brothers killed, talks about, and he did Ibogaine, which is, in my mind, the gnarliest psychedelic. You need to have a doctor there. You need to be monitored with your blood pressure monitored, all these things. It's crazy to do it the right way. And he talks about, he's this rough, before guy is this, rough Marine. You have to be, you get the training to almost disassociate yourself from your caring person to be this, killing machine in a way. And he talks about finding bliss, this cloud of bliss that he could just float on and heal from this moral injury. And yes, he saw the trauma. The interesting thing about psychedelics is it puts you in this observer mode. So he was back in Iraq or Afghanistan, but it wasn't in a traumatic way. It was in a, like you're watching a film strip or a movie or something like that. And he was just like, oh, that's what happened. Okay. And can see it in a different perspective. That is especially true for people of childhood abuse who, as a child, you can't process that. You're like, well, this adult's doing this to me, so it must be okay, but it doesn't feel okay. And now he's telling me, or she's telling me, don't tell anyone, or you'll get in trouble, or worse, I'll hurt your family. And so we don't process it, and we just bury it deep in there. And so that's typically what happens in a psychedelic experience. You have this, again, you're in this observer mode, but now as an adult, you can understand that trauma better and see that.
And and maybe bring reconciliation and
Yes,
resolution.
definitely reconciliation to it for sure.
Yeah.
And there's a beautiful story of this woman, Crystal, who had a drinking problem, alcohol abuse problem, had gotten a couple DUIs, and finally, with the last DUI, said, "I need to do something about this." And I think I think hers was a psilocybin journey, and after that journey, she has never had a single interest in taking another drink. How
Wow.
crazy is that?
Yeah.
And
Wow.
and and if you
Yeah.
do the research, and this is something for the listeners for sure, if you look back in the 60s, LSD was being used to treat alcohol abuse and
Yeah.
working. Like 60% of the people were never touching a drop again. And maybe another percentage needed kind of a booster once a year to kind of keep that at bay. But again, if you can, and I'm not saying anything against the 12-step program or anything like that, but if you can take one plant medicine and then never have another drink the rest of your life, wouldn't you do that? Wouldn't you choose that? And that's not even getting at whatever trauma was behind causing that drinking problem. But that's just like a side benefit from the medicine. So these stories, every story in there is amazing. The microdosing stories, even those, I'll just share one, and you can tell me more. But I have this wonderful woman who was a psychedelic skeptic, especially microdosing. She had done MDMA as a teenager because a version of MDMA called ecstasy, was a party drug, or maybe still is a party drug. I don't know. But and I should tell again to the people listening or watching that MDMA is not the E or the ecstasy. It's almost everyone who took that in the clubs that was cut with all sorts of other stuff. It wasn't the pure MDMA that's being used in these psychedelic trials. But anyway, she decided that, well, let's try microdosing and see what happens. And she suffered with anxiety. She had really serious anxiety about her dog dying. It wasn't about her, it was about her dog. And so she started microdosing, and she went the full month. Typically, you do a month of microdosing, a couple of days on, a couple of days off. And at the end of it, she's like, well, I don't know if that really worked or not. I don't feel that differently, and I don't know. And then about a week later, she's walking her dog, and she has this overwhelming fear of something happening to her dog. And she sits back and she realizes, I haven't had those feelings for more than a month. So the microdosing helped her with her anxiety. And so even just microdosing can have, a story that didn't make it to the book, and I really wish it had, but they weren't quite ready to share it. And it's anecdotal, so take that, with a grain of salt. But I so wish the story had made it. This is a story of an older couple, and the wife had a stroke, and they tried physical therapy, occupational therapy, all these things, and I think it was the left side of her body was mostly paralyzed. She started microdosing, and after about 2 or 3 months of microdosing, she was able to start moving the tips of her fingers and the tips of her toes. Now, whether anything more comes of that, I don't know. But again, it just shows you the power of these psychedelics to work in the brain and to rebuild these connections, even at the microdose level. So
Very
powerful in
profound.
multiple
Yeah.
ways. Yeah.
So profound. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing these stories.
Yeah.
Are you thinking of making this book a series, part of maybe there should be more of these books, more stories? Have you
I
considered?
Yes, I'm trying to collect more stories. I'm also looking a little beyond psychedelics. I think psychedelics are still such a key aspect of it. But again, if you look at people who go deeply into meditation, and I haven't quite mastered that skill yet, but they can have the same change of consciousness that happens with psychedelics. I'm not sure about the other benefits like neuroplasticity and things like that, um, but I think the stories are key, and there are a couple other people that are also now gathering stories, and my view is the more the merrier. Let's get as many stories
Yeah.
out there. Let's get this. I love what you're doing. Let's. This is my version of shouting from the mountaintops, being here with you talking about these things, because I know you'll get to an audience that I can't reach, and it's just so important because we are at this tipping point of health and overall health, not just mental health. And that's the other thing I like. For the last couple of years, there's mental health awareness, and we go, oh, we have to stop stigmatizing mental health and just talking about it. And we are, but I think mental health affects physical health so much. We should just be talking about our health. We need help with our health in so many different ways.
Yeah. Oh, beautifully said. Thank you so much. You bring so much heart and intention and so much to this stories and this work that you're doing. Thank you again.
Well, thank you, Susan.
Wow. As we're coming towards the end of our conversation, I want to quickly go back what you said that really moved me, and I'm still thinking about that.
Okay.
Is the spouses of these veterans. I never, ever thought of this before. We always talk about veterans, how to help them. There's lots of organization.
Yep.
Thankfully, it's happening. I never saw the other side of the story. There is a wife or a spouse waiting, and the level of trauma that they could experience, the anxiety. Thank you for bringing that to light. I think something to think about. And they also need support and help.
Yeah. And it's wonderful. Allison has actually joined forces with Jesse Gould of Heroic Hearts. And by the way, I know you know this as a Heroic Hearts UK. Keith, I think, is the head of that, and wonderful man. But yeah, so Allison is spearheading this thing and they're also looking at there's also sadly a lot of military sexual trauma that goes on, and so these women that are, and it's also, I should say, there's also men that obviously are sexually traumatized as well, but the women need women retreats. They there's no question they need. And so and the same thing with these military spouses. So it's wonderful to see that we're having these healing circles for women where they can feel completely safe and allow themselves to be completely vulnerable, knowing that they're in a safe place, a retreat center that's going to again heal and uplift them. But yeah, it's funny. Yeah, you don't think about that. You don't think about the spouses that are doing all those sacrifices, especially with the elite units, the Rangers and the Marines and special ops and things like that, the SEALs, where you literally don't know where your spouse is for a big chunk of the year, and it has to be really tough on them.
Yeah, extremely. If you just think about it.
Yeah.
Well, this could be a shout out to our listeners. If there's anyone out there want to spearhead or have this idea, we need more people coming together. And I think addressing the specific traumas, like specific groups of people, like the spouses of the veterans, for example, is a really good, for me anyway, to begin sort of starting something around that and creating community around that. I think it's very valuable. Also, Keith has been in our conversation. Keith Abraham, which is the from the Heroic Hearts UK. Wonderful work has been undertaken. We also have now PAR started, psychedelic access rights, in the UK. collected a lot of emails and petition. There was a petition going on. So a lot of things are changing slowly. And yeah, it's been wonderful to listen and also learn from you. And your perspective has been really valuable in these conversations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing up your parts and doing your part for helping, I guess I'd say normalize it, although I don't know if that's the right word, but something, mainstream it, or again, just Matt Zeman has a book called Psychedelics for Everybody. And then in the first line of the book, he says, but they're not for everybody. And it's sort of that funny play on words, but it's true. I mean, psychedelics have the potential healing for everybody. Those who are medically, physically sound, and the only real mental condition that's worrisome right now is schizophrenia. But other than that, if you're healthy, it's a safe thing to do. But again, it's just one possible modality of healing, and it's so if that's something you're not interested in, that's completely fine. There are other healing modalities. Just go out there and heal. Please heal. That's the most important thing.
That's a beautiful last words to close the call. Lastly, what are you working on right now? Your projects that you might like to share with our listeners?
Really, that my focus still is with this book. I'm trying to push it as far as we can. We have, a couple psychedelic conferences this summer. The Big Maps conference in Denver that I'll be going to, and then there's a Sisters in Psychedelics in Vancouver in Canada that I'll be going to. But that's the main thing. But I have a bigger healing project burning on the back burner that I will hopefully be speaking to you again, maybe down the road when it comes to fruition.
That would be wonderful. Would love to have you back. We love returning guests and following their journeys and projects as well. It's such a pleasure for us. And also, we might meet in person because we will be media partnering at Psychedelic Science 23.
Yay!
So we're very
Wonderful.
excited. Yes, with my video team, and I will be there.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's the most exciting thing. That conference, I'm sort of speaking to the choir. We who are aware of these things, but I've also been talking to all of you on Zoom for like the last 3 years. So it'll be so wonderful to actually meet in person. And so that is exciting. I can't wait for that. So good. I'm glad you're going to be there too. Wonderful.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, thank you so much, and all the best with the book. And we'll add your links in the show notes and your bio for our listeners, and they would like to get in touch and learn more.
Wonderful. Thanks, Susan.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. As always, don't be shy. Reach us. Drop a comment below, ask a question. Maybe you might like to get in touch with Ran and myself. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Psychedelic Conversations podcast is designed to educate, inform, and expand awareness. For more information, please head over to psychedelicconversations.com. You can also share with your friends or leave a review so that we can reach more people. You can also join us in our private Facebook group to keep the conversation going. This show is for information purposes only, and it is not intended to provide mental health or medical advice. Thanks for listening.